Last year, a man was found dead in a forest 40 minutes from the nearest town. He had a phone. He had a lighter that ran out of fuel. He had a jacket that soaked through in the rain and never dried. He had everything the modern world told him he needed. He had nothing that actually kept him alive when the conditions turned. 40,000 years ago, your ancestor walked into a landscape far more dangerous than that forest, colder, more exposed, populated with predators that could outrun and outfight anything human. No lighter, no jacket manufactured to a specification, no phone signal to lose. They didn't die 40 minutes from safety. They built fires in blizzards. They crossed mountain ranges in winter. They kept children alive in conditions that would hospitalize most people today within hours. And they did it with 7 tools. None of them purchased, none of them manufactured, all of them made by hand from whatever the land offered. This is Ancestor Tactics, and these are the tools that built us. Before we get into what the tools were, it is worth understanding what they actually represented. We tend to think of ancient tools as primitive, the awkward early attempts of a species that hadn't yet figured things out. The archaeological record tells a completely different story. These tools were the product of hundreds of thousands of years of refinement. Not one person's experimentation, but the accumulated learning of countless generations, each passing forward what worked and discarding what didn't. By the time your ancestor picked up any one of these tools, it had already been tested across more winters, more droughts, more impossible situations than any modern survival technology has ever faced. What they held in their hands was not primitive, it was proven. The first tool is the one that predates almost everything else we call human. The hand axe appeared in the archaeological record approximately 1.7 million years ago. Not as a finished idea, but as a beginning. A teardrop-shaped stone, carefully worked on both faces, that a human hand could grip and apply to almost any problem the physical world presented. Chop wood, butcher an animal, crack open bone to reach the marrow inside. The most calorie-dense food available in a landscape where calories were the difference between moving and not moving, thinking and not thinking, surviving the winter or becoming part of it. What is remarkable about the hand axe is not its design, it is its longevity. This tool remained in continuous use for over 1 million years. No technology in human history comes close to that record. It worked so completely and so consistently that generations stretching across geological time saw no reason to replace it. The phone in your pocket will be obsolete in 3 years. The hand axe lasted 1 million. The second tool was precision where the first was power. Flint struck at the right angle with the right force produces an edge sharper than surgical steel. Your ancestors knew this, not theoretically but physically, in the hands, through the immediate feedback of a blade that either worked or didn't. Sharp stone flakes became knives for processing meat, scrapers for removing flesh and hair from hides with enough precision to make the difference between a wearable skin and a ruined one. And a ruined hide in winter was not a waste. It was a death sentence delayed by however long the previous clothing held together. The knowledge embedded in flint work was not simple. Reading which stone would flake cleanly, which angle of strike would produce a usable edge, which technique preserved the most material. This was skilled knowledge, transmitted through direct teaching, requiring years of practice to master. Children in these groups grew up watching. By the time they were old enough to need the skill, they already had it. The third tool was not an object, it was a process. The ability to create fire on demand, not to find it, not to maintain one that already existed, but to generate it from nothing in any conditions, was among the most consequential skills a person could possess. The bow drill, a spindle of dry wood rotating against a fireboard, generating friction, generating heat, generating an ember that a person could then coax into flame through a prepared tinder bundle. The process is not complicated. Mastering it reliably in wet wood, cold hands, low oxygen conditions is one of the harder physical skills a human can develop. Groups who could do it owned their environment. They could move into colder territories because cold was no longer an absolute barrier. They could smoke meat for preservation. They could work after dark. They could maintain the social life, the storytelling, the knowledge transmission, the human bonds, that fire made possible every night. Groups who couldn't were constrained by where fire already existed. The ability to make fire did not just provide warmth, it provided freedom. The fourth tool extended the reach of the human body beyond what biology allowed. Your ancestor was not built for the hunt, slower than almost everything they pursued, weaker than most of it, with senses, smell, hearing, night vision, inferior to the predators competing for the same food sources. The spear changed that equation. A straight wooden shaft, fire-hardened at the tip or fitted with a carefully worked stone point, allowed force to be delivered from a distance. Not the distance of safety exactly. Hunting with a spear at close range on large game was still dangerous work, but enough distance to shift the odds. What the spear also required was cooperation. A hunt with spears was a coordinated event. Communication, planning, role assignment. The spear didn't just feed the group, it organized the group. It demanded the kind of coordinated social behavior that strengthened every other aspect of collective life. The tool shaped the people who used it. The fifth tool is the one history has almost entirely ignored. While hunting produced the dramatic moments, the pursuit, the kill, the return to camp with meat, gathering provided the reliable daily foundation that hunting could not. Roots, tubers, bulbs, grubs, the hidden nutrition that kept people functional between successful hunts. The digging stick was the tool that made it accessible. A sturdy, sharpened pole, sometimes fire-hardened, sometimes weighted, used to break ground and pry buried food from earth that would otherwise surrender nothing. Simple to describe, transformative in practice. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups consistently show that gathered plant foods provide the majority of daily calories across the year. Not the dramatic hunts, the quiet, persistent, daily work with a pointed stick and the knowledge of where to look. Your female ancestors carried this knowledge. They held in their understanding of the landscape, which root was edible in which season, where tubers would be found after a dry year, which soil conditions indicated food below the surface. A library that kept the group alive through every gap between successful hunts. That library was rarely written down. It was memorized, demonstrated, and passed forward, and almost all of it is now gone. The sixth tool survived almost nowhere in the archaeological record, and was perhaps the most important of all. Organic materials rot. Stone tools last for millions of years. This has given us a profoundly distorted picture of what ancient life looked like, weighted toward the durable and away from the essential. Baskets were essential, made from reeds, grasses, willow, bark, or roots, woven using techniques that required significant skill and knowledge of materials. Baskets allowed your ancestors to carry far more than their hands could hold, to transport gathered food from where it grew to where the group lived, to store surplus against the lean times that always came. A group that could carry abundance was a group that could plan, that could survive the gap between harvests, that could move through landscapes and take the food with them, rather than being tethered to wherever food currently existed. The basket is invisible in the archaeological record, but the human behavior it enabled, planning, storage, mobility with resources, is written in everything that came after it. The seventh tool held everything else together, literally. A stone point attached to a wooden shaft without cordage is two separate objects. With cordage, it is a spear. The bow drill requires cordage to function. Shelter frames are poles until cordage lashes them into a structure. Hides are material until cordage sews them into clothing. Plant fiber cordage, twisted from nettles, inner bark, dogbane, or sinew, was the connective tissue of ancient material culture, the thing that turned individual components into systems. Making it required knowing which plants produced usable fiber, when to harvest them, how to process them, how to twist the fibers against each other in the specific way that produced strength rather than unraveling under tension. This was advanced ecological knowledge. A person who could make cordage reliably from whatever the local landscape offered could rebuild almost any tool from scratch in any environment. They were not dependent on a supply chain. They were the supply chain. 7 tools: hand axe, flint blades, fire-making kit, spear, digging stick, basket, cordage. None of them purchased. None of them manufactured somewhere else and delivered. All of them made by hand, from the land, by people who understood their environment with an intimacy that most of us will never develop toward anything in our lives. What these tools represent is not primitive ingenuity struggling toward something better. They represent a complete and functional relationship between a species and its world. A relationship tested across hundreds of thousands of years and refined to the point where it worked. In deserts, in ice, in forests, on coastlines, across every environment on Earth. We replace that relationship with infrastructure, and the infrastructure is extraordinary until it isn't, until the lighter runs out, until the phone loses signal, until the jacket soaks through and the forest is 40 minutes from help that isn't coming. Your ancestors didn't have infrastructure. They had knowledge. And for 300,000 years, knowledge was enough. If this is the kind of story that lands for you, the real history of what your ancestors understood and what we've quietly forgotten, you're in the right place. This is Ancestor Tactics. New episodes every week going deeper into the knowledge that built us. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Because next time we're going back to the moment that changed everything and the single decision one of your ancestors made that you are still living with today. Your ancestors didn't survive by accident. Neither will you.